Hello all, Alison here. Welcome back to Words and Pictures for a few minutes of fun and another in the Simple Summer Seasonal Stencil Series. Have I got more S's in there than usual? I seem to have found an extra word. Today we're going to play with a gorgeous technique using texture paste through the stencil and adding embossing powder to that. In fact, we might do some inking and embossing, and we'll do some stencil with texture paste and embossing. So as per usual, I've got my tags, I've got my palette knife, I've got some stencils to play with, and we'll start with some texture paste, just for the sake of argument. So this again is a lovely simple starting point. I've got on the table some of the Distress embossing glazes. Those are going to be translucent embossing powders. You can of course use regular embossing powder for this. Let's see, well, why don't we do one of each? So there's some regular embossing powder. We'll do one of those so we can compare. And you can, of course, use metallic embossing powders, which will get you a whole other ball game. So texture paste, this is the Ranger Opaque Matte texture paste. I'm going to put some on here. And I'm going to do it again as a, see, stencil moved. I don't mind. It's not a problem for me. Going to pop that on in a fairly haphazard, loose kind of manner. Really embracing the imperfection of that. Pop that back in there. Peel it away. I'm going to give my stencil a spritz of water, as always when I'm using them with paste. And then let's start with the embossing glazes. So what have we got? We've got some speckled egg. And the thing to bear in mind with this is I'm going to end up, because I'm using multiple colours, I'm going to end up with a mix of embossing powders going on here. And I'm not going to put on too much powder. Usually I just happily tip it all over. Having said that, I've got quite a lot there, so I might try and get that straight back in there before mixing, because I do love my speckled egg. So there's some speckled egg gone on there. I'm going to have some Salvaged Patina. Oh, are you not open? I've definitely got an open Salvaged Patina. Bear with me a sec. Let's see. Must have bought some to replace it because I don't want to run out. I knew I had some. There we go. So you never want to run out of Salvaged Patina. So I'm sprinkling that on some of these other Harlequins. And then I think we'll have... Did I seriously not put the lid back on the other one? Tusk. Have embossing powder everywhere if you're not careful. And what have we got here? Antique linen. Let's have a bit of that over some of these other spaces. So I'm just getting a nice kind of random variation of where these are going. I think we might want a little bit more Salvaged Patina. And you can see I'm not using much. I'm using little tiny pinches of powder, putting those on. Let's have a bit more of this one because we love it. And it creates a wonderful sort of see-through sea glass look. Salvaged Patina and speckled egg, probably my most used embossing glazes. And then what I'm going to do, and you'll have seen this technique, it's, you know, this is nothing new. I learned this from Tim. Just a little kind of pat from underneath to allow those powders to really settle in to the texture paste, but also to mix and blend. Now, one of the things with this technique is you really want to let that dry by itself. You need to let the texture paste set by itself before you do your heat embossing. I've got some little bits of powder that have not, little bits of paste that have not got powder on. And I don't know if you can see what's on the paper here is now a beautiful mixture of all those colours. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep that. I've got, are you empty? You've got opaque bright white in, but I've got a new opaque bright white on the go, haven't I? So I could use that, or just any little pot. I might temporarily just put that in the lid of here until I find a nice little pot to keep it in. and I'll put a little label on to say that that's now a mix of powders. Since I said we were going to do an opaque one, I might mix the opaque powders into there as well and just see what happens. So set that aside. That's going to set before we do the heat embossing. Let's get the next one on the go. You could, of course, do this over already inked tags or over design paper. All of these things are possible. Let's get some texture paste onto here. This is such a beautiful stencil, this one. Beautiful repeat pattern. So again, I'm looking for partial coverage. I'm not going for the full tag. I want just a drift of those beautiful petal patterns heading down the tag. I do want to get right into the corner though. I haven't quite got there yet. There we go. And peel it back. There we are. Very nice. Let's scrape up what's on the mat and maybe use it to do a little bit of damage around the edge. A little bit of aged, weathered texture coming in from around the edge. Lid on and a little spritz of water onto the stencil, just so that's not going to dry out while I'm there. So this is, what have we got? Sky blue and fern green. I don't know whether those are still available as embossing powders. They are, I believe, Wendy Vecchi colours. Brilliant Wendy Vecchi. I hope it's not too distracting that this is still my random bit of catching embossing powder paper, which is an old gel print I'm not very interested in. So I'm putting a little bit of the opaque fern green on there. That's not the right lid. That's my special new mix of embossing glazes. This is the sky blue. A little bit of that in places. I'm a little bit tempted to throw in some gold right away. Ooh, should I, shouldn't I? Go on. Can't go wrong with a bit of gold. So let's just, oh, that was quite a lot of gold. But that'll make my mixed powder quite interesting when it goes. So there it goes. Another custom mix on the tag. And tick that off onto there. And again, I'm going to let it do a little dance to just get rid of the powder that's in between that I don't want, and to let those kind of mix and blend a little bit. Again, I've got places around the edge here where it hasn't quite taken. So I'm going to scoop up some of that, pop it on. Yeah, I think that will be quite good. And again, same thing, that needs to set, that texture paste, by itself before we emboss the powder, heat emboss the powder. So I'm creating a really, ooh, this is going to be such an exciting custom mix in this lid here. I have to find a pot for it. Let's wipe away some of that powder. One more, I'm going full on gilding for this one, I think. Full on gilding powder. So let's pop this texture paste onto these. Another one I really love. This just feels so, ooh, medieval to me, this stencil, which I think is probably why I've got the desire to do gilding with it. So I've got those drifting down in the other direction. Again, embracing the imperfections. Some of them will hit, some of them won't. I've got partial decorative elements and places where it fades in and out. And then this one is getting the full-on gold embossing powder treatment. So here I can be quite generous, just let it go over the whole area, shake it off, tap it off, just give it a little bounce, make sure everything's on there, and there it is. So whilst those are still drying and setting, let's do just a couple with the inking to show you don't have to have texture paste to do this. You can create embossing with your stencils just by having it with some inking. Oh look, little spritz of water on these. I might just go and wash these before I do the next stage to make sure that these stencils have got all the texture paste off before we carry on with some inking. Back in a sec. While these are setting, I'm going to just do the same thing, but instead of using the texture paste to hold the embossing powders, I'm just going to use some inking. So let's see what we've got. I've got Salvaged Patina, I've got Speckled Egg on the mat, and I've got Uncharted Mariner, just because those are the embossing glazes I've got. The joy of embossing glazes, we'll probably look at them in more detail in another video, so I'm not going to talk at great length here, but because they're translucent, the colour of ink you use them over is going to make a difference. So if I use Speckled Egg over a really dark blue, that's going to give me one kind of colour. If I use Speckled Egg over Speckled Egg, that's going to give me a different kind of colour, a sort of glossy Speckled Egg. And it does give you a really lovely glossy, light capturing finish. So I'm not really paying close attention to what I'm doing here. I'm allowing myself to be surprised by what happens. That's a bit of Uncharted Mariner going on. So this is a follow-up to inking through stencils, obviously, which you've seen earlier in this summer season. Do I mind that I haven't got anything going on there? I mind a little bit. Do I mind how carefully I line it up? I mind a little bit. I'm just going to put a little bit more of whatever's on that sponge into that corner. And then while the ink is still wet, that's kind of the only necessary thing. Embossing powder needs moisture or stickiness to glue to. So while that's still wet, I'm going to pop on some Speckled Egg, and I'm going to keep that round the sort of lower area and a little bit over here. And then, yeah, because this is a fairly random process, I'm going to take that off straight away and pop it here. I'm going to put some, what should we have? Ooh, we could even put some of the opaque powder on. See, there are no rules. There's experimenting and playing. So I've put that over some of that Uncharted Mariner. So that's going to become a sort of greeny colour up there. Because that powder is opaque, that shouldn't matter that it's Uncharted Mariner underneath. But having done that, I think I'm going to take some of, is this Uncharted Mariner or is this, that might be Chipped Sapphire, or it's Prize Ribbon. I don't think I want to get into dark blue powder at the moment. Let's put some, what's this? Let's put some Salvaged Patina on. And let that just go over some of these bits. And for impatient people, the good thing about this is I don't have to wait. I can go straight for the heat gun and emboss those powders right away. So let's just take a look at some of that embossing magic. Where's my heat gun gone? So some of these are translucent embossing glazes. Some of this is the opaque fern green. And I'm just letting that heat gun travel. If you're nervous about heating your thumbs, then use a clothes peg or something to hold the tag at a distance. I've got pretty adept at pointing the heat gun in the other direction from my fingers. And once one end of the tag is done, then I'll just pop it down and get the other end of the tag done. Let's see if I can get that moment of embossing happening on camera. It's pretty subtle because of the translucent nature of the glazes, but once they're done and once they're ready to catch the light, it's a really beautiful effect. Let's see what we've got. Particularly that opaque one. Can you see that catching the glossy light there? The others are subtler at the moment. Let me just see, maybe they're not fully melted. Let's give them another little blast. Trying to keep an eye on what's happening. Because my heat gun is so ancient, it sends the heat out of the bottom end. So where I'm pointing it is not necessarily where the magic is happening. And there are some places where there's no powder on that at all. So some of it is just inkiness. But the point at which this will start to show up is because, of course, it operates as a resist. The point at which we're going to start seeing this showing up in all its glory is when we start adding some inking over the top. So let's see, over this corner, maybe I'll go with a bit of dark because I've got lighter. And to start with, you might think, oh, but it's just covering it up. Give it a moment. We're going to pull back some of this colour using water. But you can see that's holding its own up there. Might put in a little bit of subtle speckled egg down at the bottom here, although because I've been using the same sponge for the speckled egg and the Salvaged patina, it might not be quite as specific as you might think. Let's layer some Enchanted Mariner up over the top of that in the corner. So now we're back to ink blending. It's techniques we've met in other ways, in other places. Start to deploy them. So here, don't know if you can see, we're getting a nice sense of resist there. So if I just spritz a little bit of paper towel with some water and knock this back a bit, that's going to allow my embossing to come back to the front. Does that make sense? Back to the front. I think I might take a little bit of Salvaged patina over the top of these green ones because that's going to be a nice effect. Oh, look at that. Look at that beauty. And again, just a spritz of water onto kitchen towel or onto a rag if you're ecologically minded. I do use rags, but when I'm filming, I just find it simpler to have the paper towel to hand. And although I've knocked back quite a lot of ink, I suspect I'll still be able to get a nice bit of spritz and flick on that. Let it sit for a moment. So I'm layering up my techniques in order to get layers of texture. Let that just sit for a moment. And because I've embossed over the stenciling, that is not going to go anywhere when I do my spritz and flick. It's just the background inks that are on the move. Already so many subtle layers going on in there. I hope you can see that catching the light. I'm trying to get that going. So I'm going to let those set for a bit and then we're going to add some colour like that. And I'll be back to heat emboss those once the texture paste is dry. The texture paste under the embossing powder has now set. I've been getting inky in the meantime, having a lovely time. And it's time to do some heat embossing of these powders. So they are adhered to the texture paste. The texture paste is dried, but what we now want to do is make sure that they're never leaving, never going anywhere. If I rub them at the moment, I'll still be able to get powder off. So I need to do the heat embossing. I'm going to try and catch those moments as the powder particles, the plastic particles melt and just give you a beautiful glossy sheen over the top of the texture paste. So the heat gun is just about now starting to warm up to where it'll do it. So let's see if I can capture what's happening. As I say, my heat tool is so ancient that the heat sort of comes out of the bottom part of it. Can you see that those are going glossy there? Oh, it's gorgeous. And that will of course give you a resist now. So that plastic glossy surface is going to resist inks. It'll resist most paint, so that you can now add colour to your background, and with some water on a cloth, you'll always be able to knock back to get to your beautiful, in this case, Harlequin emboss. So is that catching the light? Can you see how that's catching the light down on that corner? Beautiful, beautiful effect. Again, if you're worried about heating your fingertips, then get yourself a clothes peg, so you can hold it a distance. So these are the opaque embossing powders, so this is going to give us a slightly different look. There are now all kinds of embossing powders, chunky embossing powders, matte embossing powders, all kinds of things. Oh, I've just remembered, well, not remembered, I've just been reminded by seeing the glisten of gold arrive that we also added some gold into these. Can you see that catching? So the gold really doesn't look like anything much when it's just powder, but as soon as it melts, you get that gorgeous gleam of the gold in the sunlight. And it's one of my favorite things in art and craft work is capturing light, whether that's with my white spatter paints, little shimmers, little gleams of clear embossing. I use clear embossing powder a lot because I just love the subtlety of its now you see me, now you don't look. I think I've got all the powder embossed on there. That's still looking a little bit matte down here. I might give it a little bit longer. It may just be looking matte compared to the gleam of the gold, I think. I think the powder is embossed. And it's got me that amazing raised texture on the tag and that gleam of gold coming. So this gold is going to be spectacular here, isn't it? As soon as the heat of this starts catching this gold, you'll see it transform in front of your eyes to a magnificent bit of medieval gilding. Look at it go. Once it starts, it sort of spreads. So once you see it going in one area, give that bit your focus and it will spread its way across to the unmelted particles. It's a bit like melted cheese. Once one bit of cheese begins to melt, it infects the bit next to it, and then before you know it, you've got a lovely gooey mess. Not in this case. In this case, you've got a lovely solid plastic surface, a resist that's not going anywhere, whatever I now choose to do to it. So that's my gold. Wish you could feel that raised texture. It's just magic. Here are my opaque powders with hints of gold going in amongst them. That's also got that lovely sort of Art Nouveau look to it. And here are my embossing glazes, that gorgeous kind of ethereal translucence they have to them. And that ethereal translucence will show off all the better if you have something around them. So in the same way as we did here with our purely inked and embossed tag, I'm just going to do a little bit of gentle ink blending to add colour to these. I think on this beautiful gold, I'm tempted to go for a really strong bit of Uncharted Mariner to start with, just because I think the blue and the gold is going to be rather special. And as always with ink blending, if you haven't seen the ink blending videos, go and take a look at that. There's a Craft Supplies deep dive looking at blending. That's going to give us a beautiful contrast between the blue and the gold, but also that sort of just beautiful illuminated manuscript look. So I think that I will come in from the top with some Salvaged Patina, because that's also got a lovely stained glass window look to it, which is quite nice with those gold shimmers. And what do I want in the middle? Maybe a touch of pumice. I haven't got the pumice stone out. Pumice stone and frayed burlap should be here. Let's go in with a little brown in the middle, just to give it a vintage kind of a look. And having got that brown in the middle, so you see the gold is going, it's going absolutely nowhere. It's set, we're good. There's going to be no problem with that. And I love where the frayed burlap interacts with the other colours. You get those sort of beautiful mixes, maybe a little bit of Uncharted Mariner to come in from the top, blending those colour tones. I do like that hint of lightness just in the middle, as though light is coming through a window there. I think I am going to want just a touch of peeled paint in there while we're at it. It's because I like the idea of the green and gold as well. It's not full on peeled paint because I've got that other colour underneath, so it's going to, I see why I was tempted into that. It's because I've got the green embossing powder going on as well. I understand now. I think I want to do a bit of spritz and flick, don't you? Little touch of that to just add to the details in that background. And the other thing is, if you feel like your gold embossing has gone a little bit dim with all the other stuff going on, a little spritz of water and just a gentle wipe over the surface of the gold will take off any ink that is covering it up, and you'll get back to your glorious gleams. I'm after, yeah, scorched timber. I seem to be having a bit of a thing about scorched timber today. Who wouldn't? I don't want full on scorched timber though. I think I'm going to go for a bit of vintage photo in there too, to give it a slight rustiness, and that's just going to be a spatter, just for a more of a grungy look. I think that's what I'm after, kind of echoing the crackle tags that we had in the first week. I think I'm going to let that do what it's doing. No, I'm going to knock it back a bit. I want the, and then, yes, okay, so some knocked back splatters and then some more full-on splatters in dark. Yes, 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 that's what I wanted. That's a bit too much. Knock it back. That's doing a lovely grunginess, just creating interesting details. Pop those to one side. Let's go in with the next. Since I've got all this brown on the mat, I might take a bit of that up and onto this next one over the top of the gold there. This is lovely watery ink, so it's going on a treat, very easy to apply and giving me a beautiful sort of vintage look to my paper underneath all of this embossing. That's a nice start. Might go straight in with a bit of this spatter. A lovely golden look on this one. This is partly because I know that these opaque embossing powders are going to hold their own. They're going to stay blue and green. So I've got my blue and green look, whatever happens. No problem with that. Let's maybe dry that. I might, while I'm at it, just give these a little blast. Oh, it's like vintage parchment that we've got going on in the background there. Enjoying that really quite a lot. I might knock back some of those very dark ones because I don't think I need them. And that's like doing spritz and flick, but with ink, watery ink. That's what's done that effect there. So I can pull out some of that colour and leave myself just little circular ink drops. And I do want to bring in, just so we're all, that these are all in conversation with each other, this kind of sense that they belong. I do want to bring in just a little touch of the Uncharted Mariner. Now, because it's going over brown, it's coming in at a different tone. It's giving me a beautiful bronze colour. Oh, that's really quite happy making. And then around this corner, I might give it a slightly stronger bluishness by pulling that colour backwards. Same around this top corner. Yep. That pause was to look at what I'd achieved, and I think it might want a little bit of Uncharted Mariner spatter. Oh, we're spattering everything today. There it is. And I think you might as well have a bit too. And you could have a bit too. Don't want to leave anybody out. Yeah, we'll let you dry over there. Let you dry over there. And with this one, let's see what we're going to do. Quite tempted to go in again with that brownish look. It's a much softer brown, that. Was it not that? Oh no, that's the scorched timber. Where's my vintage photo? There's my vintage photo. Pop it on the mat and make it a bit watery again, because I really love that effect of just that vintage parchment. So that's watery vintage photo going on behind the Distress Embossing Glazes now. And then we'll do a bit of spattering, maybe with some frayed burlap. Again, for a parchmenty kind of look, you can't beat pumice stone and vintage burlap. No, frayed burlap. Can't beat vintage photo either. Let's face it, they're all magical vintage neutrals. Yeah, that's very nice already. Just let those dry a bit, creating that texture. And I think for this again, we will come with a bit of peeled paint, just coming in behind these ones up here. So don't worry, as we know, this is going to resist, our emboss is going to resist the ink, so I can always wipe it back by using a little bit of the, just water. Just a little bit of water will do it. I did have, yes, there we are, I had a little bit of green on a small sponge. Okay, so this is why you buy the gorgeous Tim Holtz blending tools and not some silly cheap one that's fallen apart the second time I use it. What are you going to do, eh? And I do want some Uncharted Mariner to come in. That's really interesting. So what's going on here with this texture that I'm getting? Oh, it's going over spaces where I've cleared the other inks. That's what's causing that little bit of extra texture. You know, I couldn't recreate that look if I wanted to, but it's pleasing me quite a lot as it is. Let's take that round there. And then I do want a bit of full-on vintage photo, I think, because that really just gives you a vintage page look. And all the while, those beautiful Harlequins are staying present. And if I just give them a little wipe with a damp cloth, they'll come back to full shininess in and amongst all that inkiness there. You see those catching the light? One more. One reason they're not catching the light so well is that the sun has gone in. There they are. Still doing beautiful things there. And it's going to need some spatter, a little bit of vintage photo, a little bit of scorched timber, scabby spatter brush, and again, these are backgrounds, so what's the harm in just playing? Take another little extra layer, do another little bit of extra spatter, see what kind of result you get, see if it's something that amuses you. If not, you can always start again, and or you can always cover it up with some collaging, just use it to die cut some shapes. Nobody's going to be harmed by a background that has one layer too many on it. It's just magic. So So there we go. That's having a little look at using texture stencils, texture paste with embossing powders of various kinds over the top and then adding colour. I'm going to zoom in for a little bit of music and movement close up, so stick around for that. If you've enjoyed that, give me a thumbs up. As usual, I'll try to leave as many product details in the description below as I can so that you can go in pursuit of these for yourself. Even as I'm talking, I'm seeing that I want to put some edging around this tag, so I'm doing it. It's marvellous hearing your comments and interacting with you below the line, so thank you so much for your company on this journey. I hope that's inspired you to have a little play with your stencils, with some inking, with some texture paste, with some embossing glazes. Happy crafting all.